Hello and welcome to a special midweek edition of From the Be All End, the Burnley podcast. This one's focusing on the club's accounts, which were released at some point over the Easter weekend, rather secretly and quietly, I have to say. Bit of a two-parter. The first part is Simon and Woody's chat with football finance expert Kieran Maguire, he of the Price of Football podcast and a book of the same name. He's also a lecturer in football finance and somebody who comments a lot on the state of football and the money that's swilling around in the beautiful game. And then after that chat, you'll hear from me, Woody and Justin as we also try to make sense of ALK's plans and look at a couple of worrying things lurking about in the figures, including an auditor's warning that we may no longer be a sustainable going concern should the big plan to buy cheap and sell high come to fruition. So lots to talk about over the next half an hour, 45 minutes or so. So sit back and enjoy this chat with Kieran Maguire from The Price of Football.
So, Kieran, thanks very much for joining us to have a look at Burnley's accounts for this year. You did tweet about them. What were your? Obviously the big number there is the loss for the year. But what were your overall impressions of what that accounts report had to say?
In my opinion, I think the owners took a huge gamble on coming straight back to the Premier League. And the way that they did that was by spending an awful lot of money on new players. I mean, Burnley shifted a lot of talent at the end of the Premier League season and over the course of that summer. But they also replaced it. So it was a gamble. It was a gamble that worked. And it allowed Burnley to come back to the Premier League. A lot of the focus is on the fact that the club made a loss, but the club would have made a loss the previous season as well had they not sold players. So it's the nature of football. Even the clubs which the media get very giddy about in terms of being sustainable and profitable, when you actually take a look at their hardcore numbers, they lose money as well, and they're relying on player sales.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the bit that caused sort of alarm and inevitably led to some headlines was the reference to concerns about whether Burnley would be a going concern if they couldn't do what they need to do to adjust their finances by selling players in the upcoming window. Should people be concerned about that?
It's a yellow card rather than a red, in my view. We've seen exactly the same comments with regards to Rangers. If you go through the accounts of quite a few clubs, especially those clubs who are either dependent upon owners or have significant loans, you'll see that comment from the auditors pop up. So is it great? No. Is it something to keep an eye on in terms of if there's evidence of a deterioration in the funding of the club? Yes, it is. But I wouldn't be losing sleep over it. I would be more concerned about what exactly are the owners up to. In terms of financing and funding, they've gone through what we refer to as a leverage buyout to acquire the club in the first place, which is effectively loading the club up with debt in order to buy it from the previous owners. And that comes at a risk. And it's less of a risk if you are Manchester United because, hate them or hate them, you know that they are going to be in the Premier League every single season. And no disrespect to Burnley, and for the sake of transparency, I'm a Brighton fan. We'll be down in the Championship in a few years' time. We don't know when, but we know we will be there. We're not a big enough club to survive in the Premier League forever. And it does have an impact upon your finances because there's a big hit due to the lack of TV money and so on. 1 year down in the Championship, that's okay. If it becomes 3 or 4 and you've still got that level of debt, you've got a problem.
Woody?
Speaking of Brighton, considering everybody looks at them as almost the ideal model in this kind of smaller club environment, what does Brighton do right and other certain clubs do wrong? Because are they lucky? Are they, is it a good plan, bad plan, indifferent plan, or whatever?
Well, Brighton are very lucky that they've got an owner that's put in 460 million quid into the club, and people they see the fact that they sold Caicedo and McAllister and Ben White for huge profits, and I think, that's absolutely amazing. But to get there in the first place, you had to have somebody that was willing to open his wallet year in, year out. Brighton have been in the Premier League for 7 seasons, and they've lost money in 4 of those seasons, and they've also recruited a load of crap at the start of their time in the Premier League. Just not enough crap to get them relegated, but the football was pretty turgid to watch, and they did have a broader plan, which was consolidate the position in the Premier League, survive for a couple of seasons, then try to bring in a new coach with the idea of playing what can only be described as sexy football, which started to work, but that took 3 years under Graham Potter to start to work. And then De Zerbi's come in and he's taken it to a new level. So there has been a degree of luck, because if you're recruiting a 19-year-old from Ecuador or Paraguay, you genuinely don't know whether they're going to be any good or not. And it just so happens that Caicedo, Enquiso, McAllister, all the players that they've recruited, Mitoma, for less than £10 million a piece, they've pulled out some plums. Equally, they could have turned out to be turkeys.
One of the things about the debt that Burnley have that does concern sort of fans, especially those of us who aren't accountants, and perhaps does need a bit of explaining, is, the debt has moved around from different lender to different lender. The interest rate, apparently, according to the article I read in The Athletic, is around 11% on it. The concern would be the players that they bought last year and went into the Premier League, not many of them, if any, will have increased in value over the past 12 months. So last time Burnley went down, they were able to sell players like Dwight McNeil and Nathan Collins and bring in, a substantial amount of money to cover that shortfall from relegation. This time, you feel that unless they're very lucky with 1 or 2 players, they might not be able to do that. And then you wonder what happens with the debt. When does it get called in? What kind of penalties there are. How quickly can something like that spiral, and what are the risks there with that? Because it's not a small debt.
No, it's not. And also, if you take a look at the interest charges, if you're paying 120, 150 grand a week in interest on loans, that's a substantial amount of money. Now, you've got the protection of parachute payments if the worst happens and Burnley are relegated. And from speaking to you before the show started, you weren't that confident at staying up, and I can understand that from looking at the league position and so on. If you've got to go and find 150 grand a week in the Championship to pay interest on those loans, well, you're only getting 150 grand a week from the TV deal. So once the parachute payments run out, then things do start to look a little bit tricky, because the money coming through ticket sales, the money coming through your front of shirt deal against the Championship for its front of shirt deal, you're probably getting £7 or £8 million a year in the Premier League. You'll be lucky to get a tenth of that in the Championship. So it's an issue which is lurking in the shadows. Keep in the Premier League or keep returning to the Premier League quickly. And Burnley historically have been very good at doing that. You have to give the club a lot of credit for that.
Yeah.
Then it's not so much of an issue. In terms of those repayment dates, the repayment dates can be kicked down the road. If I'm a lender and I'm getting 11% a year from Burnley and they're paying me every quarter on time, why go and lend to somebody else? Would always be my point of view. So it doesn't have to be a problem, but it's certainly riskier than an owner who comes in and, if we take a look at some of the other clubs in the Championship, for example, you've got Stoke City who just get funded by Bet365 every year. How much? If we take a look at Bristol City, they've got Steve Lansdowne, I think it is. He just puts £20 million a year in to Bristol City, and it runs as a loss. And because he's a very successful billionaire, that's fine. Is Alan Pace A, got the wealth to do that, or B, got the inclination to do that? Separate story.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't really know what to make of Alan Pace and ALK in the point of view that they don't like the sound of a leveraged purchase of the club. They don't like the sound of debt. He made a big thing when people sort of reacted to the first stories that came out after he bought the club of saying, well, it's just like mortgaging a house, and tried to explain it that way, which didn't go down that well either as an explanation. But when you have owners like that, presumably they bought the football club to get a return on their investment from it. I mean, is their only hope of doing that to actually sell the club at some stage? I mean, they can't imagine to be running into a profitable entity in English football, can they?
No, they've got no chance. The average losses in the Championship are £476,000 a week. I've just done an article I was talking to you again earlier, for the BBC, and the vast majority of clubs in the Premier League are losing money as well. And if you can't make money in the Premier League with Premier League TV income, it's going to get that much tougher in the Championship, where there are quite a few owners who are willing to lose money to try to get into the Premier League. So I didn't find his explanations with regards to similar to a mortgage particularly persuasive, because if I've been living in my house for 30 or 40 years without a mortgage and quite happily getting on like that, and I then go and take out a mortgage, well, I've suddenly got to go and repay the people that lent me the money. And if I've gone and splashed that money on a yacht and the exotic holidays and so on, that's fine. But I've still got to go and find the money to go and repay the lender. So I felt those comments were a bit patronising. And I've got no beef with Alan Pace. I don't know. I think he's linked with me on LinkedIn, which I find a little bit strange, but that's his call. We never had any conversations on LinkedIn either. It does put an additional strain on the finances of the club, because previously you were paying the wages, you're paying your transfer fee costs, you're paying your day-to-day overheads in terms of transport and maintenance and all of those. And we've now got a new cost to find every year, and that's coming out of the playing budget. Every pound that you're paying on interest on loans is £1 less than you got to spend on the playing squad.
Yeah, Woody?
I think you've touched on it a little bit so far, but if you were to look at Burnley as an ongoing concern, what would you consider a worst case scenario for a club like Burnley versus the best case scenario, and maybe what you would generally expect coming out of this situation?
Worst case scenario is that you get relegated and you don't come back up. And therefore you go from a situation where next season you'll get somewhere in the region of £42 million in parachute payments, and the season after that you'll get somewhere in the region of 34 to 35, and then in season number 3, because Burnley have only been up for one season themselves, if you get relegated straight away, you only get 2 years worth of parachute payments. So, and my concern would be for 26, 27. Then you've got a cash crunch.
Mm-hmm.
Will ALK still be in charge of Burnley then? Who knows? And it could be that they always had an exit route. And normally, with something such as a leverage buyout, you are looking for your sale date effectively from the day that you walk through the door. Now, we've seen with Manchester United and the Glazers that hasn't been the case, but they've still managed to make a fortune out of the club because, again, Manchester United's a cash cow. It's and Burnley isn't. You've not got fan clubs in 170 different countries, and you've not got people flooding from all over the UK to go and queue up for the megastore for a Bruno Fernandes duvet cover for 60 quid or whatever it's going to be on a Saturday afternoon. So you've got to pitch to a different market. You know as well as I know that Burnley's fan base comes from the surrounding area, and therefore it's people aren't going to be going into the club store week in, week out as tourist fans do. And I'm not having a go at tourist fans. It happens for all of the big clubs. It's part of the game. You don't have to like it, but it ain't going to go away whether I like it or not.
Yeah. And last one really, Kieran. In terms of what fans can be doing, I know you were involved in some of the consultation about the regulator that's coming in, and I just wonder, there's a lot of talk about fan involvement in the game and to some extent the governance of it. When you have a situation that, okay, it's not red alarm yet, we've had a yellow card perhaps, if we go down and don't come back, then people are going to start to get, squeaky bum time a little bit. What would be the prudent sort of course of action for fans sort of concerned about the long-term future of the club in a situation like that?
Well, ideally, I mean, one of the proposals of the independent regulator is that all clubs will have a license, and as part of the license, they'll have to have what's referred to as a golden share, and that golden share is owned effectively by the fans. So it does allow for greater scrutiny. Now, one of the concerns that I have with sort of fan advisory boards, there are some brilliant fan advisory boards. I'm quite friendly with the lads at Everton, and you'll go in there tomorrow on Saturday. It's going to be a fierce reception. That that the fans are very impassioned there, and they hold the club to account very well. Some of the other fan advisory boards, it's a sort of a bit like, oh, we're going in the boardroom, oh, we're getting tea and biscuits from the chairman, and you just get patronised. You get patted on the head. You get a chance to get a shirt perhaps a day earlier than everybody else does at the start of the season. And the clubs send you on their way and just mugging you off. So I think from a Burnley fan's perspective, you've got to have the right people holding the club to account, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if the club's wanting to progress, it should actually welcome that as well. But quite a few clubs are very suspicious, and I know at least one club in sort of the Premier League itself effectively just has patsies. They are selected by the club, and it's nominally an independent board, but there are ways of rigging votes, as we all know. So you can't force repayment of the loans. You can't alter contracts. That's between Burnley FC Holdings Limited and lenders and so on. What you can do, and I think some of your fans have already done this, is do the forensic checking and make sure that the club knows that you're not going to be able, that they are not going to be able to get away with anything which might be untoward and not in the best interests of what everybody wants, which is a Burnley Football Club which represents the town with pride and history and heritage and all the reasons why we fell in love with the game in the first place.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll leave it to our listeners to make their own mind up what kind of fan advisory board we have at Turf Moor at the moment. But thank you very much indeed for your time, Kieran. I know it's very precious. Everyone wants your expertise on these issues because none of us really understand what's going on a lot of the time. But it's been really good of you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, and all the best for the rest of the season. As an away fan, I always love a trip to Turf Moor because we can go in the cricket club.
Indeed, yeah.
Good man.
Cheers
now.
Right then, chaps. So, some interesting stuff there from Kieran, because we don't fully know what the accounts look like, do we? I mean, we've got these kind of spreadsheets and accounts and things, but the big takeaway I got from Kieran is that actually they tell us a little bit, but he said Burnley fans should be a little bit more concerned, less about whether the auditors think we're good as a going concern and more about what the owners are actually up to. What did you feel about that, Justin?
That's more or less my takeaway from that as well. I mean, I think this going concern thing is potentially just a bit of a red herring. Essentially what they're saying is if the plan that the club has got to make money doesn't work, then financially we might be in a bit of trouble, a couple of years down the line. I don't know of any business on the planet that wouldn't be in financial dire straits if their plan to make money didn't work. In fact, if my plan to make money over the next couple of years doesn't work, I'm going to be in financial difficulties as well. So I think it's just a statement of what's self-evident in owning a business. You know what I mean? I think he's right to suggest that. I think the real question is, do we have any confidence in the custodians of the club to carry out this plan? Is it the right plan, and can they pull it off? I mean, as you say, as you rightly point out, our knowledge of the inner workings is scant, isn't it? We don't know very much about. Well, we don't really know what the actual plan is, do we? We're a lot of the stuff that we come up with is guesswork, and this sort of information void we sort of fill by, what we observe, what we see on the pitch, and what we experience when we go to games and have interactions with the club. And I have to say, from my perspective, the signs aren't good on that front. I don't know what you think, but I'm not confident that they've got what it takes to pull it off, and that's what worries me more than anything.
Yeah, and would it? I mean, it is one of those. Justin's absolutely right. I think we only really, because ALK are so secretive, because we were told right at the start that we'd be really proud if they could tell us how they'd bought the club and how they were running the club. It'd be innovative, and we'd be really proud. And actually, the more that goes on, the more we don't know. So the less we know, the more that just sounds like a load of horse shit, doesn't it? Let's be honest. It's there's almost a disregard and a disrespect, I think, for the fans. We're seeing this big loss this year. We've seen that the borrowing's gone up. We've had this warning from the auditors, and we've not heard a single thing from Alan Pace since those accounts were snuck out on Easter Sunday.
Yeah, I think now would be quite a good time to try and assuage some of these fears, because it's some of the things that we were uncertain about that we may not have mentioned earlier in the season for fear of wanting to look like doomsayers, etc., are coming to fruition. And it's not just the playing side, it's this financial piece. And as Kieran mentioned, because I wanted to try and get to the bottom a little bit, about what material and ongoing concerns and misgivings, etc., actually means. Is it some kind of court nonsense, etc.? But like he said, it's a yellow card. Now, whether that's a yellow card, soon to be a red, etc., a culmination of yellow cards, we can play, we can flog this analogy to death. But I think what winds up happening after we get relegated is some form of fire sale that we know we don't, and we've said it week in, week out, that we don't know the prices for players, so we don't know what we're going to get in off that. And then that adds to more material uncertainty, etc. Because are we covering loans? We know loan payments are coming due in 2027. So it seems like we've, yes, there was a 5-year plan. Now it's shortened to more of a 3-year plan. Whether that gets reworked again within the next couple of seasons, time will only tell. But while I don't necessarily get the impression that it's fire sales and wholesale panics, I'd be a little bit more concerned as a collective fan base than maybe I was before the figures came out.
Yeah, because this is the only time we ever get a glimpse at the health of the club, isn't it? Because they are obliged to file accounts, and some of the ALK connected businesses are not very good at filing accounts, and that adds to some uncertainty. And there's been a movement of debt from one business to another, and shares from one business to another, and it is up to them how they run a football club, of course. But just in terms of the model, we now know from these accounts, from that auditor's warning, that the whole ranch is bet on us buying cheap and selling high. And as Kieran pointed out, as a Brighton fan, Brighton often held up as the kind of, the beacon club for this kind of thing, because they brought in huge fees for Casado and Ben White and all of these lot. Yeah. But there were a lot of turkeys before they came along, weren't they? He said that, look, we had a bit of turgid football. We brought in a lot of rubbish. Maybe that's us this year. We brought in the rubbish. Now, Brighton were able to stay in the Premier League and maintain it. We're not, Brighton to an extent, yes, are a beacon club. But as he pointed out, Tony Bloom's put in the best part of £500 million of his own money.
Exactly.
We're not seeing ALK part with, a tenth of that, are we? To sustain us in the Premier League so that this plan has a chance of working.
No, that's the problem, isn't it? We haven't got that sugar daddy who's piling money into the club. Everything that we're doing is being fueled presumably by debt. I mean, we know this is part of the stuff that we don't know about, isn't it? We don't know who. I mean, there are rumours about all these small investors in the club who've put, I say small amounts of money. I'm talking about tens of millions rather than sort of hundreds of millions. But we don't know. We don't know who's putting money in and who has a stake in the club. You see, I don't think a lot of what's in these most recent accounts is much of a surprise, really. We know the club was, the leverage buyout was funded by piling debt onto the club. We know that there are interest repayments to make. We know that we spent a lot of money in that summer of 22 and that we recoup some of that from player sales and all that sort of stuff. We know all this, and we can expect the situation to get even worse when we see the accounts for this current season next year. Although obviously the income will be vastly improved because we've been in the Premier League rather than been in the Championship, so that'll offset things again a little bit more. But we don't have somebody who's able to wipe out those debts on a rolling basis over a number of seasons. And it seems from what we can see happening at other clubs, that you do need a number of seasons perhaps of up and down before, and a lot of turnover of players and a lot of chancing your arm on this player and that player until you unearth those diamonds. I can't see anybody in the current squad that's going to make a lot of money. We've mentioned that before. So, what Kieran seemed to be saying was that we just need to stay afloat, and if we don't get back up into the Premier League, like being relegated is not necessarily a crisis point. The crisis point comes when we don't get back up and the parachute payments start dwindling. And we've still got this massive debt to service and there's no players to sell. Now, that's not going to happen for another, two seasons, is it? So, as Woody rightly points out, nobody's pressing the panic button yet. But as I said earlier, my concern is, given the fact that we don't have a great deal of information about what's going on behind the scenes, all my interactions with the club in terms of what I see on the pitch and what I see off the pitch, it's been deeply unimpressive this season in all regards. I mean, if we talk about the ownership, we look at what happens, off the pitch, don't we? Yeah. I mean, and this season, it started with me personally. At the start of the season, I have 2 season tickets. One of them didn't turn up at my house until after the first game. And every single interaction I've had with the club since then has been equally disappointing. We had the catering issues at the start of the season. We have the away fans in the home end. We've got the lackluster halftime stop and search stuff. We've got the metal hanging off one of the roof of one of the stands, and all and then we've got the kind of weird sort of conversation that the club tries to have with the fans, where it's almost a little bit passive aggressive, isn't it? Saying there's almost a bit of a, how dare you want to know what's going on? And then I don't need to talk about what's gone on the pitch and the management of the squad, the big calls that were made about, ditching last season's championship winning squad and replacing it with players who clearly, aren't up to the job. The freezing out of a lot of those players who even stayed at the club, Muric, Taylor, Brownhill, all those players were disregarded at the start of the season. We don't need to go into results. They speak for themselves, don't they? But all these things, they don't, in the absence of any real information, in the absence of any sort of explanation of why all this stuff is happening, and a real sort of conversation with the club where they offer, an explanation as to why all these things are happening, and an explanation of what what they are doing to get to the destination that they need to go to, I'm not impressed, and I'm not confident that in 2 years' time we won't be saying, well, what do we do now?
Yeah, and Woody, that is the big fear, isn't it? Because all of these stories, and we don't want to be doomsayers, but all of these stories of clubs that have sailed, flown too close to the sun and had their wings burnt, etc., starts with an ownership that refuses to engage, doesn't it? If you were proud of the way you were running the club and you had a vision, why wouldn't you tell the fan base? Alan Pace made a big thing of being custodians of this great football club, and his dad had been on the mission in the Northwest, and he was drawn to the area. And I don't disbelieve that for a minute. I think, he's moved to the area lock, stock, and the rest of ALK have. And, there's certain things you've got to say, you know what, you're acting in the right way. We didn't want absent owners. But the fact that we barely hear from the bugger these days, especially when these accounts have come out, and there's alarm bells in these accounts. But let's not forget, the accounts were not posted as a news story on the website. They were not posted anywhere on social media, and there's been no comment from the club. It is a worry, isn't it, that as just everything Justin's just said adds to the feeling of instability or incapability of running a football club in a competent way, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's weird, especially when you look back, 7 years or so, when we were touted as being arguably the best run littleish club in the Premier League, and we were. Then we kept our powder dry, and then ALK turned up. And football comes at you fast, doesn't it? We've just remembered that. We've just had, we've gone up to the Premier League. We've had to rebuild a site. We're going back down to the Championship. And in another 2 to 3 years, like we've just all said, we'll be turning around and saying, why didn't we see that coming? But we did. We did see it coming, and it beggars belief. It's just astonishing to me that even a bullshit PR release wasn't sent out. Nothing was sent out. It wasn't that it was poorly presented or poorly spoken to. It just wasn't spoken to at all. What were they expecting? Just to slip it under everybody's doormat and we'd forget about it next week when we just started selling everybody. That's what staggers me. And I don't know whether that's a condescension towards Burnley fans, a disregard towards Burnley fans. I mean, granted, we're mostly stupid, but at least let us be stupid with facts. It's and that doesn't sit well with me at all. I don't think it'll sit well with many Burnley fans as this starts to transpire and we start working out on the back of fag packets, etc., who's going to be sold where and who we're going to keep, and everybody's wrong about who's going where or what, and we have a completely different side, etc. It's strange times.
Yeah, and we always point to Up the Clarets and the message board there, and some of the work the likes of Chester Perry and Paul Wayne do, and there's again the threads on there. There's some interesting stuff, and there's and we always say this. We should perhaps have a T-shirt, Justin, that says "We're not accountants, but," because we're not accountants.
No.
But people in the know are saying actually beyond that. Beyond this release of the accounts, which is definitely for a Premier League obligation because all the clubs have done it, the difference is most of the clubs have had an accompanying statement from the board and a news story about it, etc. But there's also this kind of the ALK are trying to acquire more of the kind of bit part shares that still exist outside of ALK and have set up this asset company or this account with an asset management company. And a couple of the posters on Clarets, Up the Clarets, used to be Clarets Mad, of course, have pointed out that actually there's a lot of errors in these accounts. There's a lot of strange things within some of the wording of the accounts that have been posted to this asset match platform. Which don't quite add up. Dates when things were transferred, the way certain shares were transferred from one company to another. So beyond the kind of what we've been able to do so far. And as a team from the BL end, we will keep digging, and we are speaking to several different people which are in the know and things like that. And the invite for Alan Pace to come on and you know, as Simon points out when we were off air, I think after we recorded Monday's debrief, you know, if Alan Pace really believed in the plan, he's a Wall Street guy. He could come on and absolutely, you know, he could make us look ridiculously stupid, because he would know we're not, you know, we're not competent enough to take on a financial expert, you know. But they've chosen not to. They've chosen not to hold a forum. They don't bother with AGMs anymore, I don't think. So we have this kind of situation where, you know, a bit like, you know, foreign incursions into, you know, British incursions and Western incursions into foreign lands. We create vacuums, don't we? And then vacuums have got to be filled with stuff. And this is an information vacuum. And we're filling it with assumptions, and we're filling it with bits that we're garnering and looking at, and we're getting people like Kieran on to try and do it. The simplest way of putting all this to bed is to come out and say, everybody's talking shite. This is the plan. This is what we're doing. You know, we keep hearing rumours that, you know, the last summer there was a big drive for investment, and there was 10 to 14 small investors stateside and UK side who'd invested 10 million quid a piece. Now, obviously, that covers the accounting period after these accounts. So is 140 million suddenly going to appear on next year's accounts? You know, even Alan Pace coming out and saying, look, we had an investment drive. We've seen the brochures. You know, we have had sight of some investment brochures from ALK and you know, but it's again, where's the investment going? Is the investment going into ALK, and that pot of money is there to wave a magic wand that it, should we get into difficulties? As with most football clubs and most companies, especially transatlantic partnerships and companies, there's so many companies, I've lost track of who actually owns Burnley Football Club. Is it Velocity Sports Management? Is it ALK? Is it Longside? Is it Kettering Investments? Is it all of the... Because Pace and ALK set up loads of different companies, you know, to serve different purposes, which you are allowed to do, of course. We're not suggesting anything illegal has been done. But for me, I agree with you two. I just think, you know, in 2 years' time, we could be sat here scratching his arses going, bloody hell, we should have seen this coming. And actually, you know, Wednesday, the 10th of April, when this episode goes out, this is when we are drawing a line in the sand and saying, we need to hear from Alan Pace. It needs to be now. He has an obligation as a custodian in this football club, which has been around a hell of a long time, a lot longer than he's ever been here. And it will be around a lot longer than any of us are going to be here. And that to us, I think, is the main point. We're all Burnley fans of many, many years, you know, decades between us, as are every listener to this podcast. And I think we're getting to the point where we're just a bit sick and bloody tired of being treated like shite.
Yeah, I agreed, 100%. I mean, I know we keep saying we're not accountants, but you don't need to be an accountant to know that a company run in this manner with such an opaque financial structure is going to arouse suspicion. What are they doing? Why are they doing it this way? Why? I've said it before many times. You know, the club doesn't belong to them. They are the current custodians of it. The club belongs to the fans and the town of Burnley. Why aren't they telling those people, the real stakeholders? It's not a money-making scheme for them, is it? We've established that. I mean, as Kieran said, unless you're Manchester United, Arsenal, Liverpool, unless you're one of those clubs, you're not making any money out of this. In fact, you're probably going to, you know, lose.
He
money.
said the average loss in the Championship was £425,000 a week. I think he said something like that.
Incredible.
Or a month, maybe. I think it's probably a month, actually, given that. But it is, you're right. It's not a money making. And you know, one of the interesting things he said was when you do a leverage buyout, you kind of have your exit date already in mind. You know, now for all of Alan Pace's kind of, you know, commitments to Burnley and all this, and again, I'm not criticising the fact that he's moved over. I think we didn't want absentee, you know, and he's arguably closer than Mike Garlick and John B were, who were based kind of down south primarily and you know, interests abroad. But there's Yeah, it baffles me that we're in a position where, as you said, Justin, it arouses suspicion. So what do you do when, when suspicion is aroused and it's wrong, and if you genuinely believe that suspicion is wrong, why wouldn't you just come out and go, everyone's got the wrong end of the stick. This is what it is. We've described it previously as like a horse racing syndicate. And I think there's an element of truth to that. ALK is the vehicle. You invest in the vehicle owns the football club. By extension, you part own a football club like I could have part own a racehorse. If that's the model, and it is quite an innovative model, and it's not reliant on one rich sugar daddy or sugar mummy to come in, that is quite innovative. Why wouldn't you then say this is the model? Because then actually, does that then not increase your chances of more investment? Because people go, 10 million quid for a stake in a Premier League football club, I'll have a piece of that.
Yeah,
and suddenly you get 30 of them people, and it's 300 million.
If things are going well, if the plan's going well, if what they want to happen is happening and we're on the right track to where we need to get to, then why wouldn't they tell us?
Yeah.
That's the bottom line, isn't it?
Exactly.
Maybe it isn't.
I mean, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a weird little club, aren't we? With us being, such a community-based club. We're on a cliche in that respect. And we will all gravitate around the likes of the Chester Perrys of this world to get that information. And they will then become the soothsayers. But that will not just float around on a message board. It won't just float around on the ether of the web either. It'll float around the town.
Yeah.
And this will become gospel. And this is what Al and ALK, whatever they called this week, probably don't quite fathom or see as part of the equation. We're a very different beast to the likes of your Man Uniteds, etc. They can do whatever they damn well please. It doesn't really matter. And to a certain degree, so can Al. They've paid for it. They're in charge of it, etc. They're supposed to be the experts here. But Assuagers, shut us up by providing us with whatever you want to provide us with. If you say it convincingly enough, you're going to get people on side. But there's, it's astonishing that this isn't being cut off at the knees. They may do it towards the end of the season. I'm 100% sure they've got contingency plans, etc. And they've also got plans as to when they'd want to leave at various different timescales. But and they don't need to tell us that kind of stuff. But tell us the rest of it. Tell us the rest of it and shut us up. That's all they need to do.
Shut us up. There we are.
Yeah.
We've laid down the gauntlet to
Don't make me think about this shit. Yeah.
I will make the point also that if we were winning games, we probably wouldn't care, would we?
Yeah. No, we are fickle, aren't we? That's the thing. The group of people who were concerned about the financial side would be so much smaller when things go well on the pitch, and that's the nature of football. Of course, it is. If you, let's say, the Glazers brought unparalleled success to Manchester United, you would still have a core group of United fans quite rightly annoyed at the Glazer family, but you would also have a hell of a lot less who were willing to forgive indiscretions to the tune of billions of pounds because success was being gained on the pitch. But
To be fair to us, though, if we were being successful on the pitch, we wouldn't have quite so many financial concerns about what might be coming down the road.
Yeah. They are correlated.
They are linked, aren't they?
Yeah.
And to be honest, we probably still would be whinging, wouldn't we, as a collective?
We'd find something.
Yeah.
It's the one thing that guarantees listeners in it us whinging about as kind of battles with ALK. But there we go. Anyway, right.
Let's out of love. That's what it is.
Of course we do. Of course we do. It's very affectionate. The invite is, of course, still open for Alan Pace. So anyone from ALK to come on. The auditors can come on. Anybody who wants to come on can come on and try and shine some light on it. Any small shareholders who've had interactions with the club, do get in touch via Twitter at BL Podcast. We'll leave it there for tonight, for today. We'll be back on Friday. We're spoiling you this week, third episode of the week on Friday, with a preview of the Brighton game, Burnley versus Kieran Maguire's Brighton and Hove Albion. Another chance to kind of light up the crowds at Turf Moor on Saturday. So we'll be back on Friday for that. I hope you've enjoyed this little midweek episode. Might do a couple more midweek episodes to take deep dives into various things between now and the end of the season. But yeah, we'll see you on Friday. Enjoy the rest of your week, and up the Clarets.
Maguire to Go!